Frida Kahlo's life was a canvas of agony and triumph, painted with bold strokes of scandal, suffering, and strength. So vivid, so raw, her story blurred the line between pain and perseverance. Stricken by polio at 6, and shattered by a tragic accident in her teens, her dream of becoming a doctor dissolved into a year of bed-bound despair. Yet, in that stillness, Frida discovered her salvation: a brush, a palette, and the courage to paint her pain. Her love for Diego Rivera burned with equal parts passion and betrayal, leaving scars on her soul as deep as those on her body. Undeterred, she risked her life in desperate attempts to become a mother, defying the wreckage illness and injury had wrought. Draped in vibrant, flamboyant clothing, her armor against a world that underestimated her, Frida wore her defiance as boldly as her art. Her paintings, often mistaken for surrealism, were no fantasies but fierce reflections of her truth, the beauty, the brutality, the unrelenting reality of her existence. They are battles fought on canvas, confessions carved in color, and declarations of a spirit that refused to surrender. In this video, we uncover the woman behind the legend, her tragedies, her passions, and the legacy that continues to ignite the world's imagination. A life of scandal and strength, beauty and boldness, triumph and torment. Frida Kahlo's story remains as unforgettable as the art she left behind. If you like stories like this, please consider joining our growing community. We now have over 70 women's biographies on the channel, and we post new content every week. Now, let's get into the secret life of Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was born on a rain-drenched morning in July 1907, her arrival shrouded in the cool, damp breath of Mexico City. Her name, Magdalena Carmen Frida, was a tapestry of contrasts. Magdalena and Carmen tethered her to Catholic tradition, while Frida, derived from the German word for peace, whispered of her father, Guillermo's heritage. Years later, as fascism darkened Europe, she altered its spelling in quiet defiance, a small, poignant tribute to her Mexican soul. From the very beginning, Frida's life danced a fragile line between strength and vulnerability. Shortly after her birth, her mother, Matilde, fell gravely ill, leaving Frida in the care of an indigenous nurse. This woman, with her striking features and profound presence, left an indelible mark on Frida's imagination. Decades later, she immortalized her caretaker in one of her most haunting paintings, a fragile infant cradled by a towering mask-like figure, a symbolic embrace of Mexico's indigenous heritage and the maternal forces that shaped her early years. At home, Frida's childhood unfolded like a patchwork quilt, stitched together with care, but frayed at the edges. She and her younger sister, Cristina, were often left in the charge of older siblings or half-sisters, returning sporadically from convent school. This fractured family dynamic left a quiet ache, planting the seeds of belonging and disconnection that would echo through her art. Beyond the blue walls of the Kahlo home, the world was unraveling. By the time Frida turned 3, the Mexican Revolution erupted, toppling the long reign of Porfirio Diaz and plunging the nation into chaos. Frida would later speak of revolutionaries outside her family's doors, the hiss of bullets past her window, and her mother tending to the wounded. These stories bound her to Mexico's struggles, casting her as a child born of revolution, and forever after, she would say her true birthday was in 1910. Her mother presided over the household with unwavering resolve, a devout Catholic and pragmatic matriarch who could haggle fiercely at the market one moment and murmur the rosary the next. Frida and Cristina often skipped catechism to roam the orchards, their laughter carried on the dusty breeze. Her streak of mischief ran deep, manifesting in bold acts and even bolder tales. Frida once claimed she had strangled a classmate in a fit of rage, only to be stopped by a passing baker. Truth or invention, these stories reveal a child already crafting her myth, a fearless blend of rebellion and bravado. Yet beneath her antics lay a tender vulnerability, taunts from her half-sister, who cruelly claimed Frida had been plucked from the trash, drove her inward, where she found solace in imaginary friends and secret daydreams. Even her teasing of her father, mocking his German precision with playful jabs, was tinged with affection. Guillermo, her steady anchor, became her refuge, a counterbalance to a childhood poised between order and chaos. In this delicate balancing act, Frida forged an identity rooted in contradictions, a girl who laughed in defiance of the world's cruelties and sought beauty amidst its fractures. At 7 years old, Frida staged her first act of rebellion, not for herself, but for love. Late one night, she unlatched the balcony window, helping her sister escape with her boyfriend to Veracruz. The aftermath was chaos. Her mother's wails filled the house, her father's silent disapproval loomed heavy, and Frida stood caught in the crossfire of heartbreak and fury. Years later, it was Frida who found her sister again, hidden in a bird-filled room in Mexico City. Though years of estrangement followed, peace was eventually brokered, and the family accepted the marriage. Frida's battles with her mother were fierce and frequent. Yet years later, when her mother passed away, Frida's grief was overwhelming, unearthing the depth of love buried beneath their discord. Illness shaped Frida's childhood as much as family drama. At 6, polio confined her to her room for 9 long months, leaving her right leg withered and frail. Isolated, she retreated into a vivid inner world, conjuring an imaginary friend who danced in silence and listened without judgment. Frida etched a door onto her window pane and stepped through it in her mind to escape the confines of her room. "I was happy," she recalled, "and when I returned, I ran with joy to the patio, laughing beneath the cedar tree." Her father, Guillermo, encouraged her recovery with activities deemed unconventional for girls in Mexico: boxing, soccer, and swimming. She embraced them all, climbing trees and biking through Centenario Park, defying both her physical limitations and societal expectations. The cruel taunts of other children, calling her peg-leg Frida, couldn't break her spirit. She cursed back, disguised her leg with layered socks, and wore built-up shoes, crafting an armor of defiance. Guillermo nurtured not only her body but also her mind. He introduced her to photography, literature, and the wonders of nature, forging a bond that deepened after her illness. She became his companion on photography outings and his steady hand during his epileptic seizures. "Frida is the most intelligent of my daughters," he often said, seeing in her a reflection of his own introspective nature. Years later, she immortalized their bond in portrait of Don Guillermo Kahlo, capturing his searching eyes and furrowed brow, framed by symbols of life itself. Beneath the painting, she wrote, "Valiant because he suffered for 60 years with epilepsy, but he never stopped working and even fought against Hitler." In 1922, Frida stepped beyond her quiet life and into the vibrant world of the National Preparatory School in Mexico City. The school was alive with the energy of a nation reinventing itself after revolution. Built from volcanic stone near the Zocalo, the school buzzed with ideas, debates, and pranks. It was the heart of Mexico's cultural renaissance, where students soaked in the new ideals. At 14, Frida stood out, not just for her cropped hair, overalls, and heavy brows, but for her sharp wit and fearless individuality. Her knapsack filled with books, sketches, and dried flowers reflected a restless curiosity. Among her classmates, Frida found her tribe, a group of students blending intellect with irreverence. They stole donkeys, set off firecrackers, and mocked professors, including Diego Rivera, whose food Frida delighted in stealing. Beneath the pranks lay a shared passion for books and ideas. Frida devoured works by Dumas, Tolstoy, and H.G. Wells, her quick mind elevating her to a natural leadership role. It was here that Frida's first romance blossomed. Alejandro Gomez Arias, the charismatic leader of the group, became her confidant and muse. Their relationship unfolded in playful, passionate letters. "Let's plan to go to the United States," she wrote. "Imagine it, working for a year, saving and leaving all this behind." But her dreams were tethered by reality. Her parents disapproved of Alejandro, and political unrest often confined her to Coyoacan during school breaks. Frida imagined a future far from home, plotting bold adventures with him. "We'll be nothing but dopes if we stay here forever," she wrote, her words brimming with youthful hope. But life demanded more than dreams. At 17, Frida shouldered responsibilities, juggling jobs as a cashier and accountant while helping her father in his studio. She pursued shorthand and typing, determined to forge a path to independence. Amidst her search for freedom, a painful encounter during a job interview left her shaken. The woman interviewer blurred the line between professionalism and personal interest. The experience, though brief, left her shaken, an unwelcome initiation into the complexities of power, vulnerability, and identity. Frida later confided to Alejandro in a letter, her words tinged with uncharacteristic brevity. Not everything is as one would want it to be. Many biographers of Frida believe she was taken advantage of sexually during this interview, something which later hurt her relationship with Alejandro, who viewed her as less than pure. Frida herself, however, remains silent on the issue. By 1925, Frida had shed her past as a spirited schoolgirl, emerging as a young woman who defied convention with unapologetic confidence. Her father's photographs chronicled her transformation, her polio-thinned leg carefully hidden beneath flowing satin or boldly countered with sharply tailored suits. Her piercing gaze seemed to declare, "Frida Kahlo will not conform." Vibrant, defiant, uncontainable, she was ready to shape her destiny. But a single day split her life into before and after, September 17th, 1925. That afternoon, as Frida and Alejandro boarded a bus in Coyoacán, the air still carried the damp scent of recent rain. Their conversation blended with the city's quiet hum. Then came the crash, a trolley's slow, unrelenting force shattering the bus into splinters. Time seemed to fracture alongside the wreckage. A handrail pierced Frida's body, leaving her broken and bleeding amidst the chaos. Alejandro, miraculously unscathed, searched frantically for her and found her gilded in powdered gold spilled from another passenger's belongings. La ballerina, onlookers whispered, mistaking her bloodied form for a dancer frozen mid-performance. Her injuries were catastrophic. A fractured spine, a shattered pelvis, 11 breaks in her right leg, and steel embedded in her flesh, piercing through her uterus and vagina. Death seemed inevitable. Doctors at the Red Cross murmured grim predictions, but Frida's spirit clung fiercely to life. Encased in plaster, immobilized, she was trapped in a body that had once defied limits. Her sister brought laughter into the sterile hospital room, while friends arrived with offerings of solace. But at night, as silence settled over the ward, Frida faced the specter of death alone. Powdered gold and blood haunted her memory, a grotesque phantom she would wrestle with for years. In letters to Alejandro, she revealed her rawest emotion. "In this hospital, death dances around my bed at night," she wrote. Yet alongside despair, a determination began to take root. "I am beginning to grow accustomed to suffering," she confessed, her words brimming with quiet resolve. When she returned home, isolation replaced the chaos of the hospital. Her family's house became her world, its walls a confining prison. Friends visited less often, and the vibrant girl who once roamed the streets now lay confined, yearning for the outside world. Even so, her spirit endured. Her letters to Alejandro were playful yet poignant, signed as "Your Chamaca," and adorned with sketches of smiling and weeping faces, mirrors of her emotions. But by late 1925, Frida's letters revealed a deeper ache, the sting of betrayal. Alejandro's absence cut deeply. "Alex de mi vida," she pleaded, her love tinged with desperation. When he failed to visit, her words turned sharp. She accused Alejandro of undervaluing her. "I am worth much more than a centavo," she declared, her voice a mix of defiance and heartbreak. "You don't believe me, Alex, and you never will." As weeks turned to months, Frida began to channel her pain into resolve. By December, she wrote of standing again, both literally and metaphorically. But the fracture in her body mirrored the fracture in her relationship with Alejandro. Though she rose from her bed, their connection remained diminished, their once fiery love now a faint ember. Every ache, every longing, every razor-edged word became the seeds of her art. She took the raw material of her suffering and transformed it, crafting a life and legacy that turned pain into beauty, anguish into art, and despair into something timeless. That summer, confined to her home in Coyoacán, she created her first self-portrait. It was not merely a painting, it was an offering. Draped in a wine-red velvet dress, Frida painted herself as a romantic heroine, tender yet defiant. Against a dark backdrop, her serene gaze and extended hand seemed to plead for connection. The portrait was a message, one she sent to Alejandro with instructions. "Place it low, so it's as if you are looking at me." The gamble worked. The painting became a silent companion for Alejandro, and he reconciled with Frida. She called it "Your Botticelli," giving it life through her letters. On its back, she inscribed the words, "Today still goes on." This self-portrait marked the beginning of Frida's journey to transform emotion into art. From this point forward, she channeled her pain and longing into her work, creating a voice that would endure long after her. From then onward, pain became Frida's constant companion, It nested in her spine and right leg, a relentless shadow of the bus accident. She underwent 32 surgeries over her lifetime, most offering little relief. She lived dying, said her close friend. Her first major relapse came in 1926. Encased in plaster corsets and with limited medical support, she turned to painting to fill the endless hours of stillness. I was bored as hell in bed, she confessed. Her father's oil paints became her solace, and a special easel allowed her to paint while lying down. Her early works were a mix of experimentation and raw emotion. She painted those closest to her, family, friends, and herself. While technically imperfect, they carried an unmistakable depth, and even in these early pieces, her work bore the unmistakable mark of Frida Kahlo, a deeply personal attempt to turn suffering into beauty. Her letters during her relapse in 1926-1927 are raw, pulsating with longing, and edged with pain. They reveal a woman caught between despair and defiance, where love became her anchor and suffering her constant shadow. "Alex, you don't know how much I've needed you these days," she wrote in January 1927. "Each day I love you more, but I'm still sick, bored, and fed up with this endless misery." Her words carried a brittle humor. "You'll have to carry me around wrapped in cotton like a porcelain doll." But her vulnerability seeped through every syllable. "You are everywhere, in my books, my paintings, my room," she confessed. "At night, when the world is quiet, I close my eyes and am with you. But when I wake, I am trapped in this plaster prison." Her resolve was fierce. "I will study, I will paint, I will become better. When you return, you will find a new version of me, stronger, brighter, full of life." Yet beneath the bravado, her despair was undeniable. After a grueling spinal procedure, she admitted, "I don't know if I can endure it." Through pain, Frida began her transformation. The accident that shattered her body also shaped her destiny. "I tease and laugh at death," she once said, surrounding herself with symbols of mortality, sugar skulls, skeletons in her clothes, and art that stared into the void without fear. Yet she could never paint the accident itself. The trauma was too vast, the chaos too raw. Instead, she channeled her suffering into self-portraits that laid her pain bare. Her heart outside her chest, her spine a crumbling pillar, her wounds rendered with fearless precision. Her 1944 masterpiece, The Broken Column, embodies this duality. In the painting, her body is split open, her spine replaced by a fragile, crumbling column. Nails pierce her flesh, her tears fall, yet her gaze is unyielding. The barren landscape mirrors her isolation, but a sliver of blue sea whispers of hope, distant, unreachable, but persistent. "I was a child," she once lamented, "living in a world of colors and mysteries. But in a moment, everything changed. Now I live on a painful planet, transparent as ice." Her self-portraits externalized her inner turmoil, turning barren deserts into symbols of her loneliness and her adorned self. A crown of flowers, a crimson shawl, into a defiant declaration of life. Frida Kahlo did not simply survive her pain. She mastered it, reshaped it, and gave it back to the world as art. Vulnerable yet unbroken, wounded yet defiant. By late 1927, she had reemerged from her long recovery, stepping into a world alive with political fervor and artistic awakening. Her former schoolmates, once pranksters, now carried the fire of revolution, their causes etched into Mexico's restless streets. Alejandro Gomez Arias, her former lover, stood at the forefront, his voice rising above crowds as a rallying cry for change. But Frida was no longer tethered to her old dreams. Her accident had reshaped her destiny, leaving medicine behind as she turned to painting, a language that could contain her pain and ambition. During these turbulent years, Germán de Campo entered Frida's orbit. A charismatic student leader with an exuberance that could light the darkest corners, he became her confidant during her months of isolation. But his brilliance was fleeting. In 1929, a bullet silenced him during a protest, leaving Frida to mourn a friend whose spark had burned too brightly, too briefly. It was through Germán that Frida found her way to Tina Modotti, the enigmatic photographer whose lens captured not just faces, but revolutions. Tina opened the door to a bohemian world where art and politics intertwined. Among the gatherings of radicals and creatives, Frida met again the towering figure of Diego Rivera. By then, Diego was more than an artist. He was a force. His murals, vast and defiant, etched the soul of Mexico onto its walls, celebrating the resilience of its workers, the dignity of its indigenous roots, and the dreams of a people rising from revolution. Diego's charisma was magnetic, his humor disarming. He told outlandish tales of fighting in the Russian Revolution, of devouring human flesh, stories too absurd to believe but too charming to dismiss. Yet, beneath his theatrics, he was a man of discipline and vision, who saw art not as an indulgence, but as a weapon for change. Their first meeting became myth. At the Ministry of Education, Frida stood boldly beneath Diego's scaffold. "Come down," she commanded, "and tell me if I'm any good, or if I should stop painting altogether." Her directness cut through his grandeur, and Diego, descending to meet her, saw not just talent, but a force to be reckoned with. She invited him to her family home in Coyoacan, where he found her perched in a tree, whistling the Internationale. In her paintings, he saw raw emotion and unflinching honesty. "You have talent," he told her. "I don't believe you," she said. "I have heard you say that to all the girls to get them to sleep with you." But Rivera was impressed, both with the young woman and her art. Their connection was instant and electric. A meeting of kindred spirits who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Frida Kahlo meeting Diego Rivera was like two storms colliding, an explosion of force that would reshape their worlds. He was a colossus, not just in body but in spirit, his presence filling every room and silencing every voice. She, with her sharp wit and eyes like embers, was a storm contained within a slender frame, waiting to be unleashed. Their courtship unfolded in Coyoacan's golden afternoons, with Diego visiting Frida's home like a painter returning to his masterpiece. She teased him mercilessly, her words quick and cutting, while his booming laugh betrayed a fascination he could not hide. One night, beneath a trembling street lamp, they shared their first kiss. The lamp flickered as if unable to bear the intensity of their connection, and the world seemed to shrink around them. Frida broke the silence, her voice sharp and teasing. "You're too realistic." Diego's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "And you," he replied, "have no illusions." Diego's influence became both a lifeline and a challenge. "Paint what you see," he urged her, "but only if it's true." Under his shadow, her art began to shift, not mimicking the great masters, but carving out its own identity. In her self-portraits, she stared unflinchingly at the viewer, her vulnerability as fierce as her resolve. Diego didn't love her for her beauty. He loved her for her raw, unrelenting truth. When their engagement was announced, the reactions were as polarized as the couple themselves. Guillermo Kahlo, her father, issued a grim warning. "She is sick and will always be sick. She is intelligent, but not pretty. Think it over." Diego dismissed him with a wave, drawn not to Frida's health or beauty, but to her soul, which seemed as chaotic and vibrant as his own. On August 21st, 1929, Frida Kahlo became Diego Rivera's wife. She didn't glide down the aisle like a docile bride. She strode forward, unapologetic, her head high and her spirit untamed. The wedding photograph said it all. Diego, towering and solid as a mountain, and Frida, cigarette in hand, her eyes daring the world to look away. "It was a marriage between an elephant and a dove," she would later quip, though the truth was far more complicated. It was a collision of forces, fierce and generative, destined to leave the world transformed. Their marriage began as it would continue, raw, chaotic, and unrelenting. At their wedding celebration, Diego, drunk and volatile, shattered a man's finger in a fit of rage. Frida fled in tears, the night a brutal prelude to years of passion laced with pain. But she always returned, drawn back by a force that neither reason nor heartbreak could extinguish. Their first home on Paseo de la Reforma was a monument to their contradictions. Behind its French Gothic facade, Diego's pre-Columbian relics sprawled across every surface, while Frida's touches, humble yet poignant, softened the edges. A narrow bed, a black table, a simple kitchen gifted by her mother. It was a house alive with voices. Revolutionaries and artists filled its halls with fiery debates, their arguments tangling in the air like smoke. Yet even as their world seemed electric with possibility, cracks were already forming. Diego's rejection of communist orthodoxy led to his expulsion from the party, and in a dramatic gesture, he smashed a clay pistol, declaring his exile. Frida, unflinching in her loyalty, followed him out the door. But loyalty demanded sacrifice. She set aside her brushes, pouring her energy into caring for Diego, nursing him through illness, learning to cook his favorite dishes, presenting baskets adorned with flowers like offerings at an altar. Love became her devotion, even as her own spirit simmered beneath the surface, yearning for release. By the winter of 1929, their lives shifted to Cuernavaca, where Diego accepted a commission to paint a mural. The move brought them to a paradise of cascading gardens and tranquil fountains, but even this reprieve carried its own ironies. While Diego painted a revolutionary's defiance in sweeping strokes, a white horse and a towering zapata, Frida's sorrow was growing in silence. It was during these months that her art began to whisper truths even she wasn't ready to speak. In one self-portrait, her eyes, brimming with unspoken grief, seemed to challenge the viewer to look away. But her sorrow became a scream when she suffered a miscarriage. The loss consumed her, spilling onto her canvases in images that bared her anguish. A baby Diego cradled within her womb, her own body twisted and broken in Frida and the cesarean operation. Each line, each stroke was a wound made visible. As she had done after the bus accident, and as she would do for the rest of her life, Frida would pour her pain into her art. Then came Diego's infidelity, another blow from the man she both loved and feared losing. Diego shrugged off his infidelities, believing that it was a man's right as a communist to practice free love. "I suffered 2 grave accidents in my life," she later said, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego. The betrayal cut deeply, adding another layer to her growing ledger of pain. And yet, even in their darkest moments, there was tenderness. Diego wrote her letters filled with sketches and pet names. "My little girl." When guilt overtook him, he arrived with grand apologies, cartloads of flowers, promises made in booming sincerity. Frida, despite her rage, welcomed him back, her devotion as unshakable as it was inexplicable. Their love was a wound that refused to heal, a bond forged in suffering and stitched together with defiance. By 1930, Frida found herself in a world as foreign as it was overwhelming, America. Diego's commissions had drawn them north, where industrial marvels and capitalist grandeur clashed with her soul's longing for the vibrant chaos of Mexico. While Diego was celebrated by high society, delivering lectures and painting monumental murals, Frida struggled to find her place among the gringos, as she called them. "Their faces," she wrote, "are like unbaked rolls." Amidst the alienation, she discovered she was pregnant. It should have been a moment of joy, but her fragile body made the pregnancy perilous. Letters to her doctor reveal the agony of her indecision. Should she attempt to carry the child she desperately wanted, or protect herself from the life-threatening risks? "I want to have a child," she confided, "but I think that's impossible." Against advice, she decided to have the baby. Slowly, her health deteriorated as she fought to cling to her pregnancy. In Detroit, where Diego worked on a grand mural for the Detroit Institute of Arts, her body began to rebel. Severe nausea, spotting, and unrelenting pain haunted her days, but she resisted rest, refusing to let her fragile body dictate her will. "I'm just hoping I'm still pregnant," she wrote, dismissing the doctor's warnings. Her defiance was matched only by her hope. On July 4th, 1932, her hope was shattered. Frida miscarried, and the loss was devastating. Her friend found her in a pool of blood, crying out in despair as tears streaked down her face. She was rushed to Henry Ford Hospital. In the sterile, unfeeling corridors, Frida turned to Diego, pointing at the pipes lining the ceiling. "Look," she whispered, "how beautiful." Even in her agony, she sought something to hold on to. Within days, Frida began to sketch, transforming the hospital bed into her studio. Her grief spilled onto the page, raw and unfiltered. In Henry Ford Hospital, she painted herself naked and broken, tethered to 6 symbols of her trauma: the fetus she lost, a snail representing the slow, excruciating miscarriage, and a lavender orchid, Diego's gift, now tainted by sorrow. Behind her, the smokestacks of industrial America loomed, indifferent to her suffering. The painting was not just an image, but a confrontation, an unflinching declaration of loss, rendered in blood and bone. The miscarriage marked a profound shift in Frida's art. Her earlier works, bold and unyielding, gave way to pieces steeped in vulnerability and layered with surrealist undertones. She began to explore the dualities that defined her: life and death, hope and despair, beauty and pain. In other works, her critiques of American society began to emerge, both in her sharp humor and in her art. While Diego admired industrialization, calling machines beautiful tools of revolution, Frida viewed it as a soulless, mechanical world. In Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States, she captured this tension. Standing between two worlds, she holds a Mexican flag in one hand and a cigarette in the other, her defiant gaze bridging the divide. On the Mexican side, life flourishes, fertile soil, ancient temples, and a glowing sun and moon. On the American side, lifeless smokestacks rise amidst gray haze, tombstone-like skyscrapers casting shadows over the barren earth. Frida's body is tethered to both worlds by mechanical wires and organic roots, symbolizing her inescapable connection to Mexico and her reluctant entanglement with America. It was a powerful critique, one that laid bare her alienation in a land that prized industry over humanity. Even as her physical suffering worsened, Frida's identity grew bolder. Her elaborate costumes became her armor, her vibrant dresses and floral crowns projecting vitality even as her body betrayed her. Beneath the layers of fabric lay her scars, the corsets that braced her broken spine, and the dresses that hid her withered leg, the endless reminders of her fragility. "I dress up to distract them," she admitted, "so they won't see what's underneath." Her jewelry, jade necklaces, pre-Columbian relics, Picasso's hand-shaped earrings, became extensions of her art. Each piece told a story, not of vanity, but of survival. Her mornings were rituals of self-creation, braiding ribbons into her hair, stitching lace onto blouses, selecting rebozos that shimmered like the colors of her soul. As her health declined, her costumes grew more elaborate, as though she could outshine the darkness consuming her. Frida turned her body into a living masterpiece, a rebellion against death itself. Her suffering was transformed into beauty, and in doing so, she became her own greatest work of art. In September 1932, Frida received the news that her mother was gravely ill. The telegram cut through her longing for Mexico with brutal clarity, and within hours she boarded a train south, her grief unraveling as the miles stretched between her and Diego. The journey was agonizing. A 12-hour delay in Laredo and floodwaters at the border left her shaking, her body frail, but her spirit burning with desperation. When she arrived in Coyoacán, the sight of her mother broke her. Once so fierce and unyielding, she now lay pale and diminished, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The house was steeped in sorrow, the air thick with unspoken farewells. For days, Frida clung to hope, writing letters to Diego filled with her longing. "The house without you is nothing. I am in love with you more than ever." But on September 15, 1932, her mother passed away, her body succumbing to a long and grueling illness. Frida's heartbreak was immeasurable. Her mother's death carved a new wound into her soul, a loss that echoed through every corner of her life. The grief found its way into My Birth, a painting as brutal as it was tender. Frida depicted herself as a lifeless infant emerging from her mother's body, the Virgin of Sorrows weeping above them. "My head is covered," she explained, "because coincidentally with the painting of the picture, my mother died." The work was a meditation on the cycle of life and death, creation and loss, a visual language for a pain too immense for words. But just as Frida began to rebuild, another blow shattered her world. Diego's infidelity was nothing new, but this time it carried a sharper sting. The affair was not with a passing stranger, but with her own sister, Cristina. The betrayal cut Frida to the core, not only severing her trust in Diego, but fracturing her bond with her sister. It was a double-edged wound that left her reeling. In the aftermath, Frida abandoned her vibrant dresses and cut her signature long hair, an act of defiance and despair. Her self-portraits from this time reflected her devastation. In memory, she painted herself armless, her massive heart ripped from her chest and bleeding onto the ground. Behind her, two figures hang like lifeless paper dolls, a reflection of her fractured identity. The heartbreak spilled into her behavior as well. Frida retreated into herself, her sharp wit dulled by the weight of betrayal. She described herself as murdered by life, yet as always, she turned her pain into power. In a few small nips, she depicted the raw, visceral nature of her suffering. Inspired by a newspaper story of a man who stabbed his lover to death, the painting blurs the line between personal and universal agony. The lifeless figure of the woman, blood splattered across the canvas, becomes a mirror for Frida's own emotional wounds, and the painting stands as both confession and catharsis. Somehow Frida eventually forgave Cristina, but the scars remained. Her relationship with Diego, fractured though it was, endured. Their love was a paradox, destructive and redemptive, tender and brutal. Her foot as well continued to give her pain, causing her to lay awake at night in agony. One day I will decide that they should cut it off so that it won't annoy me anymore. Her emotional and physical agony became a wellspring for her creativity. She painted not to escape her suffering, but to confront it head-on, to wrest beauty from pain. Her work during this period was not merely art, it was survival. The betrayal by Diego and Cristina did not break Frida, it reshaped her. From the wreckage of her marriage, she began to forge a new identity, one unshackled by expectation or convention. If her art had once been a response to Diego's world, it now became the mirror of her own. She painted herself not as a victim, but as a force, scarred yet unbowed. Her bisexuality, long an open secret, became a means of reclaiming power in a world that had often denied it to her. She pursued relationships with both men and women, each affair a rebellion against the confines of her marriage. Diego, pragmatic and indulgent in his own infidelities, tolerated her romances with women, but her male lovers were another matter. On one infamous night, he stormed across the bridge, connecting their separate homes, gun in hand, forcing a lover to leap from a window and flee into the darkness. Frida, unbothered, locked the bridge afterward, a silent declaration of her autonomy. For all her lovers, Frida's greatest affair was with freedom itself. She embraced her identity as a bohemian, unashamed of her desires or her unconventional life. In Two Nudes in a Forest, she painted her own sensuality with a raw honesty that shocked her contemporaries. Two women, one dark, one light, cling to one another, their bodies intertwined in an unspoken connection. A crimson shawl drapes over their shoulders, its color bleeding into the earth, a symbol of both passion and pain. Frida's art refused to be polite. It demanded to be seen and felt. Her personal style became bolder, more theatrical, as if daring the world to underestimate her. She wrapped herself in vivid Mexican attire, layered with meaning and rebellion. But beneath the defiance was a woman still tethered to her pain. Frida's physical suffering worsened during these years, her body weakened by relentless surgeries and infections. "I drank to drown my sorrows," she quipped, "but the damned things learned to swim." Alcohol became both a companion and an escape, a way to anesthetize herself against the constant ache of her injuries and the weight of her heartbreak. It was during this time that Frida's connection to Mexico deepened. She found solace in the cultural roots that anchored her, immersing herself in the vibrant traditions and earthy humor of the Pelados, the urban and rural poor she saw as the soul of Mexico. Her language became peppered with their profanities and humor, her art reflecting their vibrancy and grit. Frida's paintings began to intertwine her personal suffering with broader themes of cultural identity, blurring the line between self-expression and political statement. The arrival of Leon Trotsky and his wife Natalia in 1937 added another layer to her already complex world. Diego, an ardent supporter of Trotskyism, had worked to secure the exiled revolutionaries asylum in Mexico. When the Trotskys arrived at the Rivera's home, Frida greeted them in her signature Mexican attire, a living embodiment of the warmth and vibrancy of her homeland. For a brief time, their lives intertwined, politics and passion colliding in the way they so often did for Frida, and she began a brief affair with Trotsky. Her affair was short but significant, a liaison steeped in danger and allure. Natalia's suspicions only heightened the drama, but for Frida, it was less a grand romance than a fleeting rebellion. Trotsky left her with admiration, but Frida left him with one of her most striking works, self-portrait dedicated to Leon Trotsky, Between the Curtains. In it, she presents herself as poised and elegant, holding a bouquet of flowers and a note of dedication. Her direct gaze, simultaneously inviting and distant, is a playful reminder of what Trotsky could never fully possess. By the end of the affair, Frida had solidified her place not just as Diego Rivera's wife, but as an artist and woman in her own right. Her art was her revolution, her body its battlefield, her resilience its victory. She had transformed her scars into stories, her pain into power, and her identity into an act of defiance. Trotsky's presence had been transformative for Frida, not only for the brief romantic intrigue they shared, but as a catalyst for her artistic reinvention. The vibrancy of this period was unmistakable, as she produced some of her most striking works to date. In What the Water Gave Me, her psychological complexity unfolds. A surreal tableau of severed veins, fractured toes, and submerged memories floats in bathwater, a reflection not of dreams, but of lived experience. Themes of loss and longing pervaded her work during this time. Paintings such as My Nurse and I, The Deceased Dimas, and Me and My Doll captured her maternal yearning, her longing for the children she could never have. Among these, My Nurse and I stands out as a poignant meditation on identity and heritage. Frida depicts herself as an infant with an adult's face, cradled by a nurse whose mask-like visage is both nurturing and foreboding. The nurse's monumental form, painted in earthy tones, embodies Mexico's pre-Columbian culture, while her milk is described as saturated with providence, linking Frida's sustenance to ancient myths and rituals. Yet the funerary mask evokes the specter of death, transforming this maternal figure into a symbol of ritual sacrifice. Frida's gaze, piercing and mature, confronts the viewer with an unflinching awareness of life's interconnected pain and vitality. Amid this creative fervor, Diego remained Frida's greatest advocate. He protected her time in the studio, declaring to anyone who might disturb her, "She's working now." Yet even as he championed her talent, Frida's humility persisted. She often dismissed her work as small and unimportant, positioning herself as an amateur in the shadow of Diego's genius. In the summer of 1938, Diego facilitated her first major sale. Hollywood actor Edward G. Robinson purchased 4 paintings for $200 each after an impromptu viewing. Frida, astonished by her unexpected windfall, marveled at the newfound freedom this brought her. "This way I am going to be free," she declared. "I'll be able to travel and do what I want without asking Diego for money." Later that year, André Breton, the self-proclaimed Pope of Surrealism, arrived in Mexico. To Breton, the country was a surrealist place par excellence, its landscapes, culture, and traditions embodying the movement's ideals. When he encountered Frida's work, he was mesmerized, declaring it the pinnacle of surrealism. Frida, however, found him pompous and insufferable. His endless theorizing grated on her nerves. Still, his recognition of her work proved invaluable, opening doors that would soon catapult her onto the international stage. Breton offered to organize an exhibition of her work in Paris, following her debut in New York, lauding Frida as a self-created surrealist. Yet Frida remained ambivalent about such labels. "I never knew I was a surrealist until the surrealists came to Mexico and told me I was one," she quipped. "I myself still don't know what I am." By October 1938, Frida set sail for New York with a spirit both defiant and uncertain. To those around her, she appeared resolute, declaring herself fed up with Diego and determined to live her own life. Yet beneath this outward independence lay the familiar pull of her conflicted heart, a love for Diego that, even in its contradictions, refused to fade. The trip marked a pivotal moment in Frida's career. Her debut at the Levy Gallery, a rare opportunity for a Mexican artist, especially a woman, to be celebrated on an international stage. Julian Levy, a champion of the avant-garde, was captivated by Frida's artistry and charisma. In his gallery, 25 of her works were displayed in ornate, folk-inspired frames, creating a striking juxtaposition with Manhattan's sleek modernity. At the opening, Frida herself was a vision in her traditional Mexican attire, embroidered blouses and flowing skirts, adorned with ribbons and jewelry. She was, as one critic described, a work of art come to life. The gallery buzzed with excitement. Luminaries like Georgia O'Keeffe, Claire Booth Luce, and Isamu Noguchi mingled among the crowd, drawn to Frida's paintings as much as her presence. Her art was unlike anything they had encountered, miniature yet monumental, vibrant with Mexican hues and layered with intimate, unsparing narratives. Critics were divided. Time magazine hailed her work as a ribbon around a bomb, blending the daintiness of miniatures with the playfully bloody fancy of an unsentimental child. The New York Times, in contrast, dismissed some pieces as more obstetrical than aesthetic, a veiled critique of her visceral depictions of the female body. But even these dismissals underscored her defiance of convention. Frida's art refused to be polite or palatable. Frida herself was thrilled by the exhibition's success. Half the paintings sold, an extraordinary feat in the lingering shadow of the Depression. Writing to a friend, she described her excitement. "The gallery is terrific, and they arranged the paintings very well. Did you see Vogue? There are 3 reproductions, one in color, the one that seemed the best. Beyond the gallery walls, New York proved to be a city of contradictions for Frida. She charmed her way into its social circles, dazzling with her bold fashion, quick wit, and uninhibited laughter. The city's vibrant neighborhoods captivated her senses. She wandered through Chinatown, Little Italy, Broadway, and Harlem, marveling at the theater of daily life in its bustling streets. Art for once seemed secondary. She admired a Piero della Francesca and a small El Greco, but found herself more enthralled by shop windows, jazz clubs, and the warmth of cafe culture. She often lingered at the sidewalk tables of the hotels, absorbing the city's rhythms, her sketches forgotten in favor of the life unfolding around her. Yet her health frequently betrayed her. Late-night adventures planned by Levy, like bar hopping in Harlem, were cut short by the sharp, familiar pangs in her spine or foot. After walking a few blocks, she would clutch her companion's arm and whisper, "We need a cab." Her persistent ailments, spinal pain, foot ulcers, and fatigue, required constant care, tethering her to the fragility she sought to transcend. Amid the excitement of New York, Frida found herself drawn to Nicholas Mure, a Hungarian-born portrait photographer whose charm and sophistication matched her own. Handsome and attentive, Mure possessed a gentle energy that balanced Frida's fiery intensity. Mure adored Frida with a tenderness that revealed itself in their correspondence. In letters, he addressed her as mi niña and mi vida, his affection leaping from every word. Frida, in turn, poured her longing and passion into her replies, confessing, "I cried very much, of happiness, and because I miss you with all my heart and my blood." Yet even in the throes of this romance, Diego's presence loomed large. Frida admitted to Mure, "Only Diego will be in my heart as close as you, always." It was an honesty that defined her, even as it complicated her relationships. For Frida, the affair was a sanctuary, a brief escape from the pain that colored so much of her life. But it was not without its own sorrows. Her letters, though tender, carried the ache of longing, and the affair's end, looming on the horizon, was inevitable. In January 1939, Frida Kahlo sailed to France, leaving behind the exhilarating chaos of New York for the layered complexities of Paris. Europe, though not yet at war, trembled on the edge of destruction. The Munich Agreement had appeased Hitler, and the Spanish Civil War was grinding to its bitter end. In Paris, the city's salons buzzed with the clash of ideologies. Trotskyists, fascists, communists, and anarchists locked in debates that spilled from smoky cafes to grand theaters. For Frida, however, Paris was less a city of inspiration and more a gaudy stage, its glamour masking a core of decadence she found repulsive. Her arrival was met with chaos. The much-promised exhibition lay in shambles. Her paintings, stranded in customs, were at risk of being forgotten altogether until Marcel Duchamp, ever the pragmatist, intervened. Duchamp not only secured their release, but found a gallery willing to host the show. Yet the delays and mismanagement soured Frida's view of Breton, whose endless theorizing and idle intellectualism grated on her nerves. Her disdain for Parisian circles extended beyond Breton. To her, the surrealist's obsession with the subconscious and the fantastical felt decadent and detached, a rich indulgence in a time of mounting global crises. "I detest surrealism," she declared. "To me, it seems a decadent manifestation of bourgeois art. I want my work to be a contribution to the struggle of the people for peace and liberty." Yet she could not deny the visibility the movement brought her. For all her critiques, Breton's admiration had elevated her stature, positioning her as a central figure in an international artistic dialogue. Frida's disdain deepened as she encountered the plight of Spanish Civil War refugees. Their stories of displacement and despair haunted her. "If you knew in what conditions those poor people exist, it would break your heart," she wrote. With Diego's help, she arranged for hundreds of refugees to seek asylum in Mexico, but her efforts were overshadowed by the indifference she saw in Paris. "These French mules have behaved like hogs with all the refugees," she lamented. The city, for all its supposed sophistication, seemed hollow, incapable of compassion. Amid the bleakness, a strange encounter with Ramon Mercader, the man who would later assassinate Trotsky, added an almost surreal note to her recollections. Disguised as Jacques Mornard, Mercader attempted to court Frida, bringing her flowers and following her around the city. Frida rebuffed him sharply, reportedly saying, "I cannot give you lodging in my house. nor can I introduce you to Trotsky. I never will. His romantic pursuit ended comically, with Mercader abandoning the bouquet in frustration after a stranger fled from his advances. By March 1939, Frida's exhibition finally opened in Paris. Financially, it was a failure. Few paintings sold, and her earnings barely covered the costs of her extended stay. Yet critically, the show was a triumph. La Flèche hailed her work as a door opened on the infinite, praising its authenticity and sincerity in an era of superficiality. Even the Louvre took notice, purchasing the frame and making Frida the first 20th century Mexican artist in its collection, a milestone she greeted with quiet pride. Despite the critical acclaim, in letters to Nicolas Muret, she expressed her indifference. I no longer care if the show will be a successful one or not. People, in general, are scared to death of war. Longing for home grew with every passing day, and by the time the show concluded, she was eager to leave Europe behind. A week after her exhibition closed, Frida left Paris with a palpable sense of relief. Reflecting on her time there, she wrote with characteristic bluntness, "They make me vomit." The city she had once hoped would offer inspiration had instead revealed itself as a glittering facade, a stage for hollow intellectualism and moral decay. While Frida downplayed her connection to surrealism, she was far from ignorant of its principles, and she understood that aligning with the movement could elevate her international reputation. Yet she refused to label herself, preferring others to project their interpretations onto her work. "I never painted dreams," she famously said. "I painted my own reality." She did not construct symbols of theoretical longing, but painted her tangible scars and unrelenting pain. Her fantastical imagery was never an escape from her body or world, but an intimate exploration of both. In this way, she turned her wounds into art, not to mystify, but to communicate, to endure, and ultimately to transcend. This approach set her apart from the surrealists, who sought to delve into the subconscious and escape the constraints of rational thought. For Frida, there was no escape, only confrontation. Her art was deeply rooted in her experiences, from the physical agony of her injuries to the emotional turmoil of her relationships. Her work became a testament to survival, resilience, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Amid Frida's rising fame and personal turmoil, her relationship with Nicolas Muret quietly came to an end. Their affair had been a source of warmth and joy, but it could never rival the deep, unshakable connection she felt with Diego Rivera. Muret's letters reveal the tenderness of their parting. In one, he wrote, "Dear, dear Frida, of the three of us, there was only two of you. Your tears told me that when you heard his voice. The one of me is eternally grateful for the happiness that the half of you so generously gave." Frida's reply, written in June 1939, captured her heartbreak and her gratitude. "Nick, darling," she began, "when I received your letter, I couldn't help weeping. I felt as though I had swallowed the whole world." Her words brimmed with sorrow, but carried the quiet dignity of acceptance. "Now I understand everything clearly, and the only thing I want is to tell you that you deserve the very best in life, because you are one of the few in this lousy world who are honest with themselves." The finality of her farewell was haunting. "While I was writing this letter, Rose telephoned and told me you got married already. I have nothing to say about what I felt. I hope you will be happy, very happy. If you find time, please write to me just a few words telling me how you are." In these words, Frida bid goodbye not just to Muret, but to a fleeting connection that had momentarily lifted her from her pain. Her letter became an epilogue to their time together, encapsulating the profound humanity of loss and acceptance. By the end of 1939, Frida and Diego Rivera's tumultuous marriage had reached its breaking point. Their divorce, finalized by year's end, was publicly downplayed by Diego as a matter of legal convenience, yet privately, it reflected a storm of conflicting emotions. Infidelity on both sides, whispers of Frida's affair with Trotsky, and her fragile health all fueled speculation. Diego framed their separation with his characteristic practicality. There are no sentimental, artistic, or economic questions involved. It is really in the nature of a precaution. Frida is young and beautiful. She has had much success in the most demanding art centers. She has every possibility that life can offer her, while I am already old and no longer have much to offer her. For Frida, the divorce was devastating. Isolated from Diego and estranged from their mutual circle of friends, she descended into despair. A fungal infection on her right hand hindered her ability to paint, and excruciating spinal pain confined her to stretching apparatuses meant to ease her suffering. Yet even in her darkest moments, her enduring love for Diego remained. "I will love him all my life," she confided to a friend, "even if he wouldn't want me to." During their 2-year separation, Frida channeled her anguish into her art, producing some of her most iconic works. The Two Fridas stands as a raw, visceral exploration of rejection and resilience. In the painting, two versions of Frida sit side by side. One, loved and whole, holds a small portrait of Diego. The other, abandoned and bleeding, desperately tries to stem the lifeblood connecting them. Her self-portraits from 1940, such as Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, transformed her loneliness into powerful imagery. The lifeless hummingbird hanging from her necklace symbolizes thwarted love, while the black cat and spider monkey perched nearby add an air of menace and fragility. These works, marked by contrasts between danger and tenderness, reflect her ability to turn her personal suffering into a universal language of endurance and survival. Desperate to sustain herself, Frida turned to her art with renewed determination. She sent her works to Julian Levy and relied on the kindness of friends who admired her resilience and talent. Despite her financial struggles, her pride remained unshakable. "I will never accept money from any man till I die," she declared, her resolve as vivid and fierce as the colors in her paintings. Yet beneath her defiance lay a profound weariness. Alone in her blue house, her body racked with pain and her heart hollowed by Diego's absence, she confided in friends, marveling at her endurance. "This has been the worst time in my life," she admitted. "I am surprised that one can live through it." On a chaotic May night in 1940, Leon Trotsky's refuge in Mexico was shattered as a storm of bullets tore through his bedroom. In the aftermath, suspicion swirled around Diego Rivera, whose San Angel studio, filled with secrets, art, and intrigue, became a focal point for police scrutiny. Diego, resourceful and ever wary, slipped into hiding and eventually fled to San Francisco, leaving Frida to face the fallout alone. Interrogated for hours, Frida recounted the raids on her home, her tears punctuated by the cries of her sister's frightened children. "They freed us," she later said, "because we were not guilty." Yet the experience left an indelible mark on her psyche, a reminder of the political and personal turmoil that seemed inescapable. The strain caused her health to further deteriorate. Diego, through her doctor, urged her to come to San Francisco for treatment. The doctor wrote, "Diego loves you, but he will never be monogamous. Reflect. What do you want to do?" In September 1940, Frida arrived in San Francisco, her body frail but her spirit flickering with hope. Seeing Diego again, she confessed, helped more than anything else. Despite their tumultuous history, the prospect of reconciliation buoyed her. "I will marry Diego again," she wrote to a friend, her words tinged with cautious joy. "He says he loves me more than any other girl." Diego's persistence had been unwavering, his appeals bolstered by Frida's declining health. "I'm going to marry her because she really needs me," he admitted. Their reconciliation came with conditions. Frida would support herself through her art, Diego would share half their household expenses, and they would forgo physical intimacy. "I can't possibly make love with you," Frida told him, "with the images of all your other women flashing through my mind." Diego agreed to everything, grateful to have her back. On December 8, 1940, Diego's 54th birthday, the couple remarried in a quiet ceremony. Frida, adorned in a flowing Spanish costume, looked radiant despite the toll of months of suffering. For 2 weeks, they enjoyed a fragile peace in California before she returned to Mexico for Christmas. By February 1941, Diego returned to Mexico, free from the controversies surrounding Trotsky's assassination. Their reunion, though marked by the scars of their past, signaled a new phase in their relationship. Frida, armed with a newfound sense of independence and self-assurance, had redefined the terms of their partnership. No longer content to be overshadowed, she emerged not just as Diego's companion, but as his equal. Their life in Coyoacán settled into a rhythm of creativity and quiet pleasures. In the mornings, Frida painted in her studio, often inviting Diego to critique her progress. His awe for her talent was evident in his declarations. "She is a better painter than I am." Afternoons saw the couple wandering the vibrant markets of Coyoacán, where Frida's warmth and generosity endeared her to artisans and shopkeepers alike. "She spoiled me," recalled one vendor. "She paid more than the maestro did, and spoke to me with a kindness worth more than money." Frida's car rides through the city were no different. At traffic stops, she greeted the beggars who gathered at her window, offering them not just money, but dignity and kindness. She loved them, Jacqueline Breton remembered. Her generosity extended to her home, where life brimmed with the antics of animals she adored: Bonito the parrot, Aztec dogs, and even a mischievous eagle named Gertrude Capablanca. The early 1940s brought a mix of personal and global despair. Frida endured the death of her beloved father, poor health, and the weight of World War II. Diego, too, grieved as he watched the ideals he cherished crumble amid the devastation in Europe. Yet amid this turmoil, the couple found purpose in a shared dream: the construction of Anahuacalli, a temple museum for Diego's vast collection of pre-Columbian idols. Built on a volcanic lava bed, the project was a testament to their shared reverence for Mexican culture and their defiance of global chaos. Diego described it as a strange kind of ranch, blending Aztec, Mayan, and his own architectural vision. Frida, despite her struggles, gave everything to support Diego's ambition, even selling personal assets to fund the construction. This commitment to anchoring herself in the earth and in Diego's vision found its most poetic expression in her self-portrait Roots, 1943. In this serene, dreamlike painting, Frida lies entwined with the land, a vine blooming from her torso and spreading across the barren ground. The image captures her belief in interconnectedness, a defiant statement that life persists, even amid destruction. The 1940s were a kaleidoscope of contrasts for Frida Kahlo. Recognition glimmered on the horizon, and the world began to take notice of her as more than Diego Rivera's wife. Yet even as the applause grew louder, her body seemed determined to betray her, anchoring her in a reality of relentless pain. It was a decade of survival, of rising above, of painting her suffering so vividly that the world couldn't look away. Frida's work transformed during this time. What began as a private confession of wounds became a language the world could understand. Her canvases, both intimate and expansive, carried the weight of her struggles with a beauty so visceral it felt like an intrusion. Exhibitions in Mexico and abroad brought her accolades, but recognition was not an escape, it was a magnifying glass. The world now saw her pain writ large, but for Frida, it was always a matter of endurance, not applause. Diego hovered in the margins of this growing spotlight, an inescapable force in her life. He was her greatest advocate, her fiercest admirer, and her most persistent tormentor. He directed collectors to Coyoacán, singing her praises, yet his infidelities loomed like a shadow over her triumphs. Their love was a tangle of contradictions, tender and cruel, supportive and dismissive, empowering and suffocating. Frida once joked that Diego's love was like the volcano Popocatépetl, imposing, eternal, and impossible to tame. As Frida's fame spread, her body faltered. Spinal pain gnawed at her daily, and the corsets prescribed to steady her only deepened her discomfort. Painting became both refuge and rebellion, each stroke a defiance against her own frailty. Tree of Hope, Keep Firm, 1946, captured this defiance. On one side, Frida lay vulnerable on a stretcher, her surgical scars exposed. On the other, she sat upright in a crimson dress, holding a banner that proclaimed, "Tree of Hope, Keep Firm." The barren landscape behind her mirrored her physical desolation, but the figure in red declared her refusal to be broken. Diego called her the bravest person I know, but her bravery came at a price he could never fully grasp. In The Little Deer, 1946, Frida embodied a stag pierced by arrows, her serene face defying the pain she depicted. Each wound was a reflection of her suffering, both physical and emotional. The forest, with its broken branches and fractured trunks, mirrored her fragility. But amidst the wreckage, a single green shoot hinted at resilience. Diego's absence haunted this painting, the arrows perhaps an echo of his betrayals. Yet even in her pain, Frida clung to life with a ferocity that radiated through her art. Recognition brought new patrons and opportunities, yet Frida remained unyielding. Eduardo Murillo Safa became one of her most loyal supporters, commissioning dozens of works, including a tender portrait of his mother, Doña Rosita Murillo. In her hands, the matriarch became a symbol of resilience, her knitting needles moving with a rhythm that seemed to echo the threads of Frida's own life. Unraveling, reweaving, enduring. Diego's influence was never far. He sent visitors to see her paintings and praised her genius to anyone who would listen. Yet even as he elevated her art, he diminished her with his endless affairs. One particularly cruel betrayal, the public spectacle of his relationship with actress Maria Felix, threatened to sever their bond. Frida, ever sharp-witted, offered Felix a note that read, "Diego is yours, if you can handle him." Behind the humor was the ache of someone who knew she would never fully have him, nor fully let him go. Back at Casa Azul, Frida surrounded herself with color and life. Her home became a sanctuary, not just for her, but for her students, a small group affectionately called Los Fridos. When traveling to teach at La Esmeralda became too taxing, she welcomed them into her garden, where they painted among the animals she adored. Diego marveled at her ability to nurture their talent, calling her a better teacher than he could ever hope to be. "Art belongs to the people," she told them. "It should live where life happens." Yet even in this sanctuary, her suffering persisted. Her letters to her doctor express her frustration. "Explain to me what kind of screw-up I have. Some doctors insist on operating, but I won't allow it unless you tell me it's absolutely necessary." Her wit flickered through the darkness, even as she described her pain in raw, unvarnished detail. Her art during this time captured both her anguish and her resilience. Without Hope, 1945, depicted Frida bedridden, a funnel of grotesque objects spilling into her mouth, symbolizing the forced feedings she endured. The painting's vivid colors clashed with its harrowing subject, a reflection of Frida's ability to find beauty even in despair. Despite everything, Diego remained her anchor. He returned to her arms again and again, drawn by a bond neither could sever. Frida once wrote that loving Diego was like loving the sun, brilliant, necessary, and impossible to hold. Their relationship, marked by betrayals and reconciliations, fueled some of her most haunting works. In Diego and I, 1949, his face looms on her forehead, a constant, inescapable presence even as tears streak her face. It was a love that suffocated as much as it sustained, a paradox she carried to her grave. In the tapestry of human connection, few loves burn as brightly or as painfully as that of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. Their union was not a gentle companionship, but a tempest, a collision of two monumental forces whose lives were tangled together by passion, pain, and an unshakable devotion. To speak of them is to tell the story of love at its most raw, beautiful, excruciating, and wholly consuming. Diego Rivera once said that without Frida, he would have died without knowing what a real woman was. This was no hollow compliment, but an admission of the profound place she held in his life. She was his muse, his partner, and often his caretaker. To Frida, Diego was the center of her universe, the wellspring of her joy and her agony. "Diego," she wrote, "you are my everything, my child, my lover, my husband, myself." Their love was a paradox, an unbreakable connection bound by the very tensions that strained it. Diego was a man of insatiable appetites, a romantic and sensualist whose infidelities cut Frida to the bone. Yet for all his failings, he saw her as his equal, even his superior. "We are all clods next to Frida," he declared to anyone who would listen. He praised her art with tears in his eyes, holding her up as the finest painter of their time. And while his passions often strayed, his deepest admiration and affection always returned to her. For Frida, loving Diego was both torment and fulfillment. Her self-portraits reveal the depths of her pain, the way his infidelities shattered her. In the love embrace of the universe, she depicted herself as a maternal figure cradling Diego like a child, her tears nourishing him as milk flowed from her heart. In Diego's vulnerability, she found strength. In his dependence, she discovered a purpose as vital to her as life itself. Diego, for all his egocentricity, depended on her as well. He delighted in the way she fussed over him, scolded him for his messiness, and bathed him like an oversized child. When he fell silent under her reproach, it was with the guilty resignation of a boy caught in the act, grateful for the attention even as he bristled under it. She, in turn, reveled in caring for him. "No one will ever know how much I love Diego," she wrote in her diary. If I had health, I would give it all to him. If I had youth, he could take it all. And yet Frida's devotion was not blind. She understood the chaos of loving a man like Diego. She compared his infidelities to the rain falling or the sun rising, an inevitability she could neither change nor fully accept. To protect herself, she turned her pain into art and adopted the role of the indulgent mother, a figure who could transcend the wounds of romantic love. At every moment he is my child, she once confided. Born every moment from myself, but their bond was more than maternal, more than romantic. It was elemental. Frida's words, scrawled in her journal like incantations, capture the spiritual and carnal totality of their connection. Diego, nothing compares to your hands. My body fills with you for days. You are the mirror of the night, the violent light of lightning, the dampness of the earth. My fingertips touch your blood. All my joy is to feel your life flow through me. When apart, their hearts ached for reunion. When together, their fiery temperaments often clashed. Yet time and again, they returned to each other. Even during the most public of Diego's scandals, Frida remained his constant, just as he returned to her when his fleeting infatuations dissolved. "What do I live for?" she asked him once. "So that I live," he replied. In the end, it was Frida who kept him grounded, and Diego who gave her life its most profound meaning. She once wrote, "Why do I call him my Diego? He never was, nor ever will be mine. He belongs to himself, but I adore him as if he were mine." Their love was not perfect, nor was it meant to be. It was flawed, relentless, and extraordinary. A sacred bond forged in the fires of their shared brilliance and mutual wounds. Their lives were a dance of chaos and creation, and their love, for all its anguish, remains an eternal testament to the enduring power of connection. By 1950, Frida's health was deteriorating rapidly. One morning, she woke to find her toes blackened. The night before, they were fine. Gangrene had crept in, devouring her flesh in silence. She suffered from fevers that raged like wildfire, relentless headaches, a crumbling spine, and a leg so consumed by pain it barely held her. The gangrene spread, a silent predator threatening her life. Doctors debated amputations. An experimental gas treatment was proposed. Her spine was fused with a cadaver's bone, which caused an infection. What followed was agony, fevers, oozing abscesses, and relentless injections. The abscess seeped through her corset and the smell filled the room. Frida called it the smell of death. Her mornings began with needles plunged into infected wounds, pain shooting through her as she clutched the bed rails. She called it lying on broken glass. Yet even as pus drained from her back, she laughed with doctors about its lovely shade of green. Diego was her solace when he was there. He took a room nearby, rocking her to sleep, reciting poetry, or dancing like a bear to coax rare smiles. But his absences widened her despair. A doctor observed, her health mirrored Diego's behavior. If he was there, she thrived. If he was gone, she suffered. Her hospital room became a sanctuary of rebellion and art. Candy skulls grinned from the walls, mocking death, while delicate paper doves trembled from the ceiling. Her bedside table overflowed with contradictions. Paint jars beside morphine vials, brushes nestled among bloodied bandages. Forbidden to paint, she used lipstick and iodine to sketch on her cast. She animated puppet shows with her feet, turning the devices holding her leg into a stage. Even when the sight of her wounds made visitors recoil, she quipped, "Don't look away. Death isn't as ugly as you think." When she returned home, isolation crept in like an old enemy. She was reminded of lying alone after the bus accident that would forever change her life. Her body, weakened and in pain, allowed only short walks with a cane, yet she found ways to rebel. Maria Felix became her jester, dancing and singing to coax laughter from her lips. On rare outings, Dr. Polo drove her in his Lincoln convertible. "Give me a double tequila," she demanded, her grin defiant. Feeling the wind on her face, the rush of the open world, these moments were her fleeting freedom. At home, evenings buzzed with life. Friends and family gathered for dinners filled with music, gossip, and laughter. Frida's wit lit up the room, her humor razor sharp. Photographer Bernice Colco remembered, "Frida was always so happy, surrounded by joy. Her diary betrayed her anguish. I am weary, often desperate, but I want to live." Her devotion to Diego remained absolute, even as his infidelities shattered her. Several times, she tried to end her life, her nurse saving her just in time. Her final works were frantic and raw, her brushstrokes wild and her colors bleeding chaos. On Diego's birthday, she ripped off her corset and declared, "Never again." Staggering among cardboard Judases hanging from the rafters, she raised her arms in triumph. "Never again, no matter what happens," she shouted, her voice cutting through the haze of morphine and pain. In the spring of 1953, Frida Kahlo's body waged its final, losing battle against relentless pain. Yet a lifeline appeared. Lola Alvarez Bravo, a visionary gallery owner and trusted friend, proposed a solo exhibition of Frida's work. For Frida, it wasn't just an honor, it was salvation. Frida's death was near, Lola later recalled. Honors should be given while people are alive to enjoy them. The news ignited something in Frida, her spirit flickering like a fragile flame. When doctors forbade her attendance, she refused to be deterred. "I'll be there," she declared, "even if I have to arrive lying down." On the night of the exhibition, the streets outside the gallery overflowed with anticipation. Traffic ground to a halt as hundreds gathered, craning their necks to glimpse the artist who had become a legend in her own lifetime. The sirens wailed through Mexico City's humid evening air, announcing her arrival like the overture to a grand spectacle. An ambulance pulled to a stop outside the gallery, and the crowd held its breath. The doors opened, and there she was, Frida Kahlo, carried on a stretcher, her vibrant Tijuana dress ablaze with color against the pallor of her fragile body. Her wide eyes, though clouded with sedation, searched the faces around her, as if reclaiming her place among them. A faint smile, both triumphant and defiant, graced her lips as cameras finally clicked. Even now, Frida was unmistakable, bold, irreverent, alive. Inside, the gallery was a living altar to her spirit. Her bed, set in the center, was draped with grinning skeletons that dangled from the mirrored canopy, mocking death with the same irreverence Frida wielded so well. Photographs of Diego, her family, and her revolutionary heroes adorned the headboard, while the walls pulsed with her paintings, raw, vibrant testaments to her suffering and unbroken will. Around her, the hum of voices mingled with bursts of laughter. The scent of flowers and tequila hung heavy in the air. The crowd surged, their emotions teetering between awe and grief. Some pressed their hands to their mouths as tears welled in their eyes, while others whispered prayers for the woman who seemed both saint and warrior. Dr. Adel hobbled in on crutches, his recently amputated legs swaddled in bandages. Leaning over Frida's bed, he kissed her forehead and said, "Death only exists if you fail to give it life." Frida, her sharp wit cutting through the haze of exhaustion, fired back with a laugh, their exchange lifting the mood and scattering the tension. When the crowd pressed too close, her friends wheeled her bed onto the terrace for air. But tonight, Frida was more than her frailty. She was electric. She sang corridos, her voice rough but defiant, and laughed as tequila flowed freely around her. Guests formed a line to embrace her, their whispered goodbyes mingling with words of admiration. Poets recited verses in her honor, their words floating in the air like prayers. Diego, his pride evident in every toast, laughed louder than anyone, masking the quiet dread that flickered in his eyes. As the night wore on, her exhaustion became palpable. Friends encircled her bed, their voices rising in a final chorus of joy and sorrow. Frida joined in, her voice frail yet unwavering, a thread of defiance woven into the tapestry of sound. This was no ordinary exhibition. It was a rebellion, a declaration that even as her body failed her, Frida Kahlo would remain defiant. In her diary, reflecting on the night, she wrote one final plea to herself: "Tree of hope, keep firm." And firm she remained. On that unforgettable night, surrounded by her art, her people, and the adoration of a nation, Frida Kahlo burned brighter than ever, a fierce, unbroken spirit daring even death to dim her light. After the evening, Frida's health grew worse. She rarely left her bed. A few months later, her friend Adelina Zendejas went to visit her. "I had gone to leave her a ring," Adelina recalled. She was terribly ill. Soon her doctor arrived, his urgency cutting through the room like a blade. "Let's see the leg," he said. Frida hesitated, gripping the bedclothes as if they could shield her. When she finally revealed it, Adelina was horrified. The limb was a wreck, shrunken, discolored, 2 toes already lost to gangrene. Frida locked eyes with the doctor, defiant. "Well, doctor, what's it to be this time? Another toe? Be quick about it." Faril hesitated before delivering the verdict. "Frida, it's no longer a matter of toes. The leg must go. The scream that followed tore through the house, a primal, gut-wrenching cry of anguish. "No!" she howled, her voice reverberating through the room. She clawed at her bedclothes, her body convulsing with sobs. Turning to Adelina, Frida's voice cracked. "Tell me the truth. What do you think?" Adelina glanced at Diego, who stood frozen, tears in his eyes, unable to speak. Gathering her strength, Adelina whispered, "Frida, this leg is a prison. Let it go, and maybe you'll be free." Frida looked at Diego, her tears softening. "If you say so," she murmured. Then, to the doctor, "Prepare me for the operation." In the days leading up to the amputation, Frida tried to mask her fear with bravado. "They're going to cut off my paw," she joked to friends, waving her mangled foot like a macabre trophy. But her diary told a different story. In jagged lines, she poured out her anguish and hope in equal measure. On the morning of the surgery, Frida dressed as if for a fiesta. She wore a Tijuana dress and adorned herself with rings, earrings, and flowers. Always the artist, even in the face of obliteration. But as the nurse prepared her leg, the room grew oppressively silent. Diego sat motionless, his massive hands folded like stone, watching as they took her away. When Frida awoke after the surgery, her silence was unbearable. Gone was her fiery temper, her biting humor. She lay in her hospital bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Even Diego's presence couldn't stir her. Judith Ferretto, her loyal nurse, tried to coax her out of her despondency. "Paint," she begged. "Go to Chapultepec Park. Do anything. Please, Frida, live." But Frida only turned away, her voice flat and distant. "I don't want to live." One entry showed her as a one-legged doll, teetering precariously on a cracked classical column, her body disintegrating into splotches and shadows. Above the figure, she scrawled in bold letters, "I am disintegration." Yet on another page, defiance broke through despair. "Feet. What do I want them for if I have wings to fly?" 3 months after the amputation, Frida began to reclaim fragments of herself. She had red leather boots made for her artificial leg, embroidered with gold trim and tiny bells that jingled as she moved. "These boots," she declared, "will dance my joy." And they did. One evening, she twirled in her living room, her skirts swirling, her bells ringing. Friends cheered, tears glistening in their eyes as they watched her reclaim life, if only for a moment. But the triumph was fleeting. Her diary reveals the torment beneath the surface. "They amputated my leg 6 months ago. Centuries of torture. I keep wanting to end my life. Diego holds me back because I believe he'd miss me. But never have I suffered more." By July 1954, Frida knew the end was near. Pneumonia ravaged her, but she defied her doctors to attend a communist protest, wheeled through the streets by Diego, her hand clenched in a fist of defiance as she shouted with the crowd, her face gaunt, her body skeletal, but her spirit incandescent. This would be her last public appearance. On the night of July 12th, Frida told Diego she felt her time had come. She gave him an antique ring, a gift for their upcoming 25th anniversary, and whispered, "I'm leaving you soon." Hours later, in the quiet of early morning, she slipped away. The official cause of death was a pulmonary embolism, but whispers that she took her own life remain. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to come back." The news came gently, as if the weight of it could crush the air. Diego's driver, who had known Frida since she was a girl, approached him with trembling words. "Señor," he said softly, "Miss Frida has died." Her body was placed in a gray coffin and carried to the Palace of Fine Arts, Mexico's grandest cultural stage. There, in the soaring lobby where murals whispered the country's history, Frida lay in state. Draped in black cloth, surrounded by fiery red flowers, her coffin seemed like a sacred altar to her indomitable spirit. Diego refused to believe she was gone. When he touched her, he swore her skin rose in goosebumps. Friends say he looked like a man cleaved in two, a soul torn apart, his immense frame crumbling under the unbearable weight of loss. He stayed beside her all night, as though his presence might anchor her spirit to the earth just a little longer. The lobby swelled with mourners, friends, dignitaries, and strangers drawn by the force of her legacy. An honor guard stood at the four corners of her coffin, a silent tribute to the warrior she had been. The crowd, overcome with grief and love, sang the national anthem as her coffin was carried down the marble steps, out into the rain. As her hearse moved slowly down Mexico City's Grand Avenue, the streets swelled with people, their tears mingling with the falling rain. She was taken to be cremated, a final release for the brilliant, self-willed woman who once said, "Why do I need feet when I can fly?" And now she could, free of the corsets that bound her, free of the agony that marked her every step, free at last from the suffering that could not define her, no matter how it tried. But Frida's essence lingers. Her art remains, a testament to the fire of her pain, her defiance, and her iron will to live. It speaks to us still, a reminder of beauty born from struggle, a beacon for those who endure. Diego, shattered but devoted, gave Frida's beloved house to Mexico. The Casa Azul, her blue sanctuary, is now a living museum. Inside, her world endures. Her toys, her paints, her dolls that stood in for children she could never have, love notes to Diego, plaster corsets, and her wheelchair. On the wall hangs her final painting, completed just 2 weeks before her death. In bold, blood-red letters, she wrote the words, "Viva la vida," live the life. Diego made 2 requests: that the house always keep a corner for him, and that when he died, his ashes be mixed with hers. The second request was never fulfilled, and so the woman who painted her pain, who lived with relentless passion and unflinching truth, rests alone. But her legacy remains, vivid and eternal, whispering her defiance, her beauty, and her resilience. Viva la vida. Thank you for watching this week's video on Frida Kahlo. Her art, her struggles, and her extraordinary life continue to inspire us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy engaging with you, so don't hesitate to share your insights, reflections, or suggestions for future videos. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, or consider joining the channel or our Patreon. We post new content every week about amazing women throughout history. So let us know who you'd like to see featured next. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible patrons: Velocity Girl, ZenLife68, Jillian Barker, Junie Moon, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Kafum Chung, Harry Thurston, Karen Craig, Michelle Lynn Neal, Bavia Andrea, Tracy Walsh, Elizabeth, CTS Bathory, America Marie, Joy McGuire, Amber Perry, Amanda Lynn, Snowball, The Inappropriate Heifer, Kendra McNally, Marianne Nelson, Deborah Shepard, Ida Kloster Jensen, Kay Philomene, Jules Mack, and Black Knight 5897. Your support breathes life into this project and makes these stories possible. Special congratulations to last week's trivia winner, Mary Jo 1951, for guessing Mae West, and to this week's winner, JML 238, well done. And to everyone watching until the very end, thank you for being part of this journey. Your support helps this project grow and ensures these stories are shared with the world. Stay curious, keep exploring history, and as always, thanks for watching.